The letter arrived on a rainy October day when Eleanor Whitmore sat in her small flat, trying to force herself to finish a bowl of cold, instant soup. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, bearing the seal of Hartwell and Associates as solicitors from the town of Millbrook. Eleanor had never heard of the town or the solicitor, but when she opened the letter, her world changed forever. Dear Miss Eleanor Victoria Whitmore, the message began, we regret to inform you that following the death of your uncle, Mr. Samuel Victor Whitmore, who passed away on October 15th of this year, you are the sole beneficiary of his estate, namely, the property located at 13 Thorn Lane, Millbrook. Eleanor read the letter 3 times. Uncle Samuel? She had never heard of such a relative. Her mother had died when Eleanor was 17 and had never mentioned a brother. She hadn't known her father at all. Where had this mysterious uncle come from? And why had he left her a house? A week later, Eleanor sat on a train that rhythmically clattered along the rails, carrying her away from familiar London bustle toward the unknown. In her pocket lay the keys to her inheritance, and a strange note that the solicitor had handed her with an embarrassed expression. Never open the cellar at night. If you hear the call, do not answer. The handwriting was shaky, nervous, as if the writer feared every word. Millbrook turned out to be the kind of place where time had stopped 50 years ago. Tudor houses with timber framing, cobblestone streets, and everywhere, the feeling of lurking silence. Eleanor took a taxi from the station, and the driver, upon learning the address, visibly darkened. Thorn Lane. To the old Whitmore house, he shook his head. Didn't know anyone would be living there again. What do you mean? Oh, nothing particular. It's just that people avoid that place. They say it's not right there. The house greeted Eleanor with creaking shutters and peeling paint. The 2-story Tudor cottage had once been beautiful, but now gave the impression of an abandoned place. The neighboring house to the right was tightly boarded up, while to the left lived an elderly woman who, upon seeing Eleanor with her suitcase, hurriedly disappeared behind her curtains. Inside, the house proved surprisingly cozy. The furniture was antique but solid, bookshelves stood everywhere, and in the fireplace lay prepared logs, as if the owner had just stepped out and would return soon. On the sitting room table lay a note. Eleanor, welcome home. Provisions in the pantry, wood in the yard. Sorry I couldn't wait. S.W. On the first night, Eleanor went to bed with a strange sense of peace. Perhaps this was fate, receiving a house from an unknown relative precisely when life in London had finally reached a dead end. There was no work, no money either, and she had to rent her flat. Here she could start anew. But in the middle of the night, a sound woke her, a quiet, barely distinguishable whisper coming from somewhere within the walls. Eleanor listened, but the sound ceased. She decided it was wind in the old boards and tried to sleep again. However, sleep wouldn't come. The house was too quiet, yet at the same time, as if something was breathing in the darkness. In the morning, everything seemed normal, and Eleanor attributed her nighttime fears to fatigue and unfamiliar surroundings. She decided to explore the house more thoroughly. On the ground floor were the sitting room, kitchen, library, and a small room that apparently served as a study. On the second floor, 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. She hadn't examined the cellar yet. The heavy oak door was locked, and there was no key among those the solicitor had given her. In the library, Eleanor discovered an impressive collection of books on history, philosophy, and the occult. An entire shelf was devoted to spiritualism, demonology, and ancient religions. Between the pages of one book, she found a photograph. A middle-aged man with sad eyes stood before the familiar house. On the back was written, Samuel Whitmore, 1987. So the uncle had indeed existed. But why had he never contacted the family? And why did his face seem vaguely familiar to Eleanor? The second night brought new strangeness. Eleanor woke to the sound of loudly ticking clocks throughout the house. She got up and walked through the rooms. The antique clock in the sitting room, the kitchen clock on the wall, the desk clock in the study, all showed different times but ticked in unison, creating an obsessive rhythm. And at 17 minutes past 3, all the clocks stopped simultaneously. In the ensuing silence, Eleanor heard the whisper again. Now it definitely came from beneath the floor. She went down to the sitting room and stood over the spot where the sound seemed to originate. Directly beneath her feet was the cellar door. Eleanor remembered the warning from the note and hurried back to the bedroom. But she couldn't fall asleep again. In the morning, she went to the neighbor, the elderly woman who had so hastily hidden yesterday. She took a long time to open the door, and when she finally decided to, she crossed herself at the sight of Eleanor. You're from that house? From the Whitmore house? Yes, I'm Samuel Victor's niece. Did you know him? The woman, she introduced herself as Mrs. Millicent Ashford, invited Eleanor for tea, but her hands trembled as she filled the kettle. Knew him, of course. Lived next door for 40 years. He was a good man, quiet. Only in recent years he became strange. Always reading some books, couldn't sleep at night. And then the disappearances began. What disappearances? People started vanishing. First young Tommy Fletcher, the local shepherd, then Mary from the neighboring village, and recently Mr. Pemberton, who worked at the shop. Everyone said it was after Samuel Victor. Well, started digging something in his cellar. Mrs. Ashford fell silent, clearly regretting she had said too much. What was he digging? How would I know? I only heard at night banging, like someone hammering, and light in the cellar windows. And then he died, and everything seemed to calm down. Only now you've come. The woman looked at Eleanor hopefully. You're not staying long, are you? You'll sell the house? Eleanor didn't answer. Returning home, she began searching for the cellar key. She searched all the drawers, all the cupboards, but to no avail. However, in the uncle's study, behind books on the far shelf, she discovered a thick notebook in leather binding. It was Samuel Whitmore's diary, and the first entry made Eleanor's blood run cold. May 15th, 1995. Today I understood that the curse is real. Mother was right when she spoke of the family secret, but I thought it was superstition. Now I know. Every generation of the Whitmore line must pay, and my turn has come. Eleanor flipped through the pages, trying to understand what her uncle had written about. The entries became increasingly chaotic. It demands renewal of the pact. 30 years have passed since father. I thought with my parents' death it would all end. But no. Blood calls to blood. Found grandfather Ivan's old records. He made the deal in the 1692. Saved the town from plague, but paid a terrible price. Every 30 years the line must sacrifice one of its own. Dreams give me no peace. I see myself as a boy, but these aren't my memories. These are memories of grandfather, great-grandfather, all who came before me. We are all the same face, the same soul, trapped in time's snare. The last entries were made in uneven handwriting. The seals weaken. The cellar breathes at night. Soon I'll have to go down there and complete what great-grandfather began. But I've found a way to break the chain. If I have an heir, if someone comes after me, perhaps it will be possible to change the terms of the deal. Eleanor is the only hope. She must understand. And on the last page was drawn a diagram of the cellar with strange symbols and the inscription, 7 seals hold the ancient one. When all seals weaken, it will emerge. But one can renew the pact or destroy everything. Eleanor slammed the diary shut. Her hands were shaking. What kind of nonsense was this? Ancient pacts, sacrifices, curses. The uncle had clearly gone mad in his final years. But then why did everything in the house seem so real? Why did the clock stop at the same time? Why did she hear whispers from the cellar? That night, sleep wouldn't come at all. Eleanor lay listening to the sounds of the house. At 3 in the morning, the clock stopped again, and in the ensuing silence she heard a voice. Quiet but distinct, it called her by name. Eleanor, Eleanor, come down. She rose as if enchanted. In her hands, as if of their own accord, appeared a torch and a key ring she hadn't fully explored. Among the keys was one antique, heavy one, with an intricate pattern. Eleanor went down to the sitting room and approached the cellar door. The key fit. The door opened with a prolonged creak, and from the darkness came a smell of cold and something else, the scent of old blood and decay. Eleanor directed the torch beam downward and saw stone steps leading into the depths. Each step echoed as if she were descending into a cave. The cellar turned out to be much larger than she had expected. This wasn't just a room under the house, but a real hall with high-vaulted ceilings. In the center stood an ancient stone altar covered with symbols that hurt to look at. They seemed to move in the torchlight. On the altar lay a doll in a faded dress. It had real human hair and eyes, living, moist eyes that followed Eleanor's every movement. Along the walls ran long scratches, deep furrows as if someone or something had clawed at the stone. Some scratches were old, covered with centuries of dust, but others seemed fresh, and in the air hung a sound, barely audible breathing, as if the cellar itself were a living being. Eleanor wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't obey. She approached the altar closer and saw that the symbols weren't simply carved into the stone. They were filled with something dark that gleamed in the torchlight. Blood. And the doll. The doll smiled. Eleanor screamed and rushed toward the stairs, but upon reaching the top, found the door locked from within. She pounded on the door, screamed, but the house was silent, and only then did she hear footsteps behind her, slow, measured steps climbing the stone stairs. In the morning, Eleanor woke in her bed. She was dressed in the same clothes as yesterday. Her boots were dirty, and cobwebs were tangled in her hair. But the cellar door was locked. The key lay on the kitchen table, and Eleanor almost believed it had all been a nightmare. Almost. But in the bathroom mirror, she saw something that made her heart stop. Her reflection was delayed. When she raised her hand, the reflection repeated the movement a second later. When she turned her head, the reflection lingered, as if reluctantly following the original. In the following days, the strangeness intensified. Eleanor would find herself in different parts of the house, not remembering how she got there. She'd wake up in the library, in the uncle's study, once, in the garden, though she was certain she had gone to sleep in the bedroom. Dreams became increasingly vivid and detailed. She saw herself in clothing from different eras, but always in the same house, always descending into the same cellar. And then the woman came. Eleanor was working in the garden, trying to tidy the overgrown flower beds, when she heard the gate creak. Walking toward the house was an elderly lady in a black dress, with gray hair gathered in a strict bun. She moved slowly, leaning on a walking stick, but there was strange liveliness in her eyes. "Eleanor Whitmore?" The woman's voice was hoarse but commanding. "Yes, that's me. And you are?" "My name is Victoria Thornfield. I was a friend of your uncle's. I need to speak with you." They sat in the sitting room, and Victoria remained silent for a long time, examining the house. "Nothing has changed," she finally said. "The same smell, the same shadows. Tell me, Eleanor, have you been down to the cellar yet?" Eleanor flinched. "How do you know?" "By your eyes. Everyone who's been down there gets a special look. The look of those who have seen what humans shouldn't see." Victoria took an old photograph from her handbag. "Look at this." In the picture was a group of people, men, women, children, standing before the familiar house. The photograph was clearly old, judging by the clothing, late 19th century. But among the children in the foreground stood a girl who was an exact copy of Eleanor as a child. The same dark hair, the same gray eyes. Even the facial expression was identical. "This is impossible," Eleanor whispered. Her name was Lenora Whitmore. She was the daughter of Ivan Whitmore, the same Ivan who made the pact in the 1692. She disappeared at age 23. Officially, it's believed she drowned in the river. But we know the truth. What truth? She went down to the cellar and never returned, like all the others. Your grandfather Nicholas, your father Victor, your uncle Samuel, they are all one face, one soul, trapped in time's snare. Victoria leaned closer. "Do you think you're living your own life, making your own choices? But you've already lived this life dozens of times. Every 30 years, the Whitmore line gives a new sacrifice, and each time it's the same person. You, only in a different body, at a different time. This is madness. I'm Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 28 years old. I was born in London. But do you remember your childhood? Your real childhood? Not fragments of memories? Do you remember your first teacher's name? The address of the house where you grew up? Eleanor opened her mouth to answer, but no words came. She tried to remember her childhood, but in her memory were only vague images, as if seen in a dream. And the more she strained her memory, the clearer other memories became, not her own. She remembered being called Samuel, and she was a middle-aged man. She remembered being called Nicholas, and she was a young lad. She remembered being called Lenora, and she was a girl in a dress from the previous century. What's happening to me? The same thing that happened to all your previous incarnations. The pact awakens the memory of the bloodline. You begin to remember all the lives you've lived and understand that you never had a choice. Victoria stood up. Tomorrow is the new moon. The seals will be at their weakest. Either you go down to the cellar and renew the pact with your blood, or what sleeps there will awaken and turn the entire town into a dead wasteland. The choice is yours, though we both know there is no choice. She reached the door and turned back. And if you decide to resist fate, remember, the last one who tried to destroy the altar became possessed. The entity didn't die. It simply found a new home in his body. And now it's free, wearing a human face and waiting for its moment. Left alone, Eleanor paced through the house like a caged animal. Memories of other lives came in waves. She remembered how Grandfather Nicholas stood before the same choice, and finally went down to the cellar with a knife in his hand. She remembered how Father Victor tried to flee the town, but somehow returned and also disappeared in the cellar. She remembered how Uncle Samuel studied ancient books, seeking a way to break the curse, but ultimately surrendered. And she remembered the pact itself. The winter of 1692, when plague was decimating the town and enemies were advancing from the east. Great-grandfather Ivan stood in the same cellar before the ancient altar, which was much older than the house, older than the town, older than human memory, and something that had lived underground since time immemorial offered a deal, the town's life in exchange for the bloodline's blood. Every 30 years, one life as sacrifice. Ivan agreed. He thought others would pay, future generations. He didn't know that all his descendants would carry his soul, his guilt, his curse. On the last night before the new moon, Eleanor sat in the library with her uncle's diary, trying to find a way out. Samuel had written about counterspells, about ways to destroy the ancient pact. But all methods required enormous sacrifices. To free the bloodline, one had to destroy what slept in the cellar, and for that, sacrifice oneself completely, not only body but soul. At midnight, the clock stopped, and the house filled with whispers. The voices of all previous incarnations called Eleanor to the cellar. Time to go down. The pact must be renewed. Eleanor stood and walked to the cellar door. In her hands was a knife, the same one used by all her predecessors. But when she reached the door, she stopped. In the uncle's diary was a diagram showing exactly where in the altar the key symbol was located, if it could be destroyed. Eleanor descended into the cellar. The doll on the altar smiled wider than usual, and the symbols on the stone glowed with dim red light. The air was thick, almost material, and each breath was difficult. Finally came a voice from nowhere and everywhere at once. I've waited so long. I've been hungry for so long. Eleanor approached the altar. The knife trembled in her hand. Renew the pact, my child, as all before you have done. Your blood on the stone, your life for the town's life, and in 30 years you'll return again, in a new body, with a new name, but the same soul. No, Eleanor whispered. What? I said no. Eleanor raised the knife but directed it not at herself, but at the central symbol of the altar. The blade plunged into the stone, and the cellar filled with howling. The symbols went out one by one. The doll crumbled to dust, and the altar itself cracked. Foolish girl! Do you think this will kill me? I am older than your towns, older than your gods. I will find another way. The cellar ceiling began to collapse. Eleanor ran toward the stairs but didn't make it. A stone slab struck her head, and the world plunged into darkness. Eleanor woke up in hospital. The doctor said neighbors had found her after the house partially collapsed due to foundation decay. Miraculously, she survived, suffering only a concussion and several fractures. The house was beyond repair. It was demolished. A month later, Eleanor returned to London. She sold the plot in Millbrook, found work, rented a new flat. Life gradually returned to normal. The strange memories of other lives disappeared as if they had been just a very vivid dream. She almost believed it was all over. But sometimes, standing before the mirror in the mornings, Eleanor noticed that her reflection smiled when she herself was sad. And in the reflection's eyes sometimes flickered something alien, ancient, and hungry. Something that patiently waited its moment, hiding in the depths of her soul. And when this happened, Eleanor remembered the last words from the cellar, "I will find another way." The entity hadn't been destroyed. It had simply moved to the only place available to it, into the body and soul of the last of the Whitmore line. Now it was free. Free to walk the world in human form, free to feed on people's fears and pain, free to wait for the right moment to return to full power. And Eleanor was merely a passenger in her own body, locked in the depths of her own consciousness, watching as something ancient and evil lived her life. At night when the city slept, this something went hunting, and people disappeared, first in London, then in other cities. No one connected the disappearances to the quiet girl who worked at the library and lived alone in a small flat. No one noticed that her eyes sometimes became completely black, and her smile, too wide for a human face. The pact was broken, but the curse remained. Now it was no longer bound to one place, to one house. Now it could go anywhere, take any form, and no one could stop it. And Eleanor Whitmore, the last of the cursed bloodline, remained forever a prisoner in her own body, watching as ancient evil used her hands, her voice, her face for its dark purposes. And the most terrifying thing was that sometimes in moments of the entity's particularly strong hunger, the boundaries between them blurred, and Eleanor could no longer understand where she ended and it began.